Hey guys, and welcome to the channel. This little amp right here has transported me back to a time where I was wanting to get into hi-fi, but things like this just didn't exist. But before I get into any details about this amp, thank you to Fosi Audio for making this review possible by sending me a demo unit. All thoughts and opinions are my own, so let's jump straight into how this is built. This amp has a metal housing and has a black powder coated finish on it. On the front, it's got a power toggle switch that comes on with a confident click. Beside it, you get two tone control knobs, one for treble and one for bass, and a volume knob. These are cool to the touch, being made of metal. The tone controls sadly don't have a resting slot in the middle, so you have to see where the marker is placed to know whether or not it's set to 0 dB. The potentiometers they've used have some resistance to them, which gives it a premium feeling when you interact with them. But the combination of that resistance with a metal finish doesn't always ensure good grip on the knobs when you're adjusting either of them. It would have been rather nice if these had a little texture on each knob or had a knurled finish, which I know Fosi Audio has done with their K5 Pro, but I'm being a little picky. This does get grippy rubber feet at the bottom, so holds a surface well even if it's got a little tug weight from cables behind it. And speaking about its behind, the rear side of the amp has one RCA input, a power input and binding posts which can hold banana plugs, or if you don't have those, you can unscrew them to hold the cables into these slots. You just have to be careful that the cables don't touch one another. One huge plus point with this amp is that it's surprisingly small. Not only can it easily fit on a hi-fi rack if that's where you want to place it, but it takes up less than half the size of the amp I'm presently using on my desk to drive my speakers. This has partly been made possible thanks to it having its power in an external brick, which can sit in a storage section in your desk or on a shelf nearby. When it comes to how this performs on a sound front, they've used a Texas Instruments TPA3255, which is a Class D amp chip, and they claim that this can push out up to 300 watts of power. The power brick that comes with it in the box isn't able to push it up to 300 watts, and I honestly don't see the need for having that amount of power because this one performs just fine. Plus, if you do get a more powerful power supply, the chances are you might just not be able to match it properly, so you might just get a noise floor with the TB10D. Now, I think Fosi Audio has in fact paired a very good power brick with the TB10D, and there's no real need to get a more powerful brick. This one performs just fine. It's been able to drive some speakers that I've tested these with without any problem. Straight out of the box, the tone controls are all the way down, I think at about -6 dB, so the audio will sound very thin over there. So I've put them at the 12 o'clock position, and the audio does sound a lot more natural. So if you do want to listen to more rounded sound at lower volumes, pumping up the tone control, the bass tone control a little bit will obviously give you a nicer, easy listening experience. Both the tone controls, I think, do a +6 and a -6 dB. I couldn't find any information as to what exactly they do, but these don't really have to go all the way because it can get a little too exaggerated, but they do add a good amount of color if ever you need it. I've paired this amp with two sets of speakers. Now, Fosi Audio says that these should be paired with bookshelf speakers, but the bookshelf speakers I have over my shoulders, the LS50s, are known to be not easy to drive. So I have tried it with these and a set of tower speakers, which are the KEF Q11s. And quite surprisingly, it drove the towers very easily. So with the LS50s in particular, I did find there to be maybe a very slight pullback when it came to driving them. Now, the amp I normally drive the LS50s with is a much higher end amp. So maybe there's the way the amps function, because the Class D has a very different function to the amp that I use. It's not very fair to compare this amp to higher end audiophile grade equipment. These are able to push the power through and drive, be it your towers or even your bookshelf speakers, very easily. What I did think was that this amp wouldn't image and stage very well, because a lot of budget amps don't do that, but I'm happy to say that I was quite wrong when I thought about that, because this one manages to image fairly well. The stage also doesn't get restricted. It is as wide as it should be. But if I'm being very particular, typical audiophile with a bit of snobbery, there is a very thin veil when I'm listening to high-res audio. When it comes to compressed audio, there's no real issue, but with high-res audio, there isn't as much detail coming through my bookshelf speakers as they normally would with the other amps that I use. But I'm just being very picky with this. Now, when I hook up the towers to this, it's absolute enjoyment. I have no issue with how those speakers perform, but this was good fun to listen to, especially on the tower speakers. Something that this amp did make me do, which I'm not exactly proud about admitting, because I'm very particular about listening volumes and my ears in particular. So I sat down to listen to this amp with my tower speakers, and I found myself increasing the volume very slowly and just enjoying my music. So I slapped on some old rock music because I was just in the mood. This amp made me want to listen to more rock music. And I found eventually that my wife started closing doors so that the sound wouldn't carry to the other room. So I was like, okay, hang on, I'm getting a bit carried away enjoying this. So I decided to whip out my reference noise meter, which is just a simple app on my phone. And I was surprised to see it was holding a noise level of 90 dB, which is a little too loud. So I didn't listen to this for too long, but I had to drop the volume because I don't like to listen to very loud music. But the fact that this amp made me forget it is just proof enough that it is a very enjoyable amp to listen to. And when it came to that 90 dB from the tower speakers, I wasn't anywhere close to the 50% mark. The knob wasn't anywhere close to being at 12 o'clock. I think it was more around between 10 and 11 o'clock position. So this thing can get really loud even despite not having a more powerful power brick. And I have to throw this in because I always do. Avoid listening to music too loud if you do want to preserve your hearing. It can cause damage in the long run. The handling of the volume knob is a bit funny because when you first take it away from the 0 mark, I'd say between 0 and 10%, there is absolutely no signal coming through. It's not that it gradually starts increasing. There is nothing there. It's totally non-linear. As soon as you hit 11%, there's a whisper of sound. And then between 11 and 25%, there's a sudden boost in the signal. So you'll have to turn this very carefully, hopefully avoid just cranking it. If you do that, there's a possibility of blowing your speakers if you take it too far. But when you move from the 25% to the 40% level, you're getting very close to that 90 dB level of noise. So it gets very sensitive between 25 to 40%. So you don't really need to go past, I'd say, the 30 or 35% volume level. It's got more than enough juice over there. So what have I been feeding this amp with? Well, I've connected it with my digital portable high-res player from the 3.5mm line out to the RCA input on the amp, and it sounded pretty fine. I don't think the line out on that is as powerful as my desktop DAC. When I connected that is a topping D50S. It's got a very strong line output signal. It sounded pretty good. There's no issue with the signal there. But what I did do is I connected an old Technics tape deck to it, and I think thanks to wear and all, there must be a little drop in the signal because I had to crank the amp to around 50%, which would be an equal to 30% that of the other two players, but the amp had no issues driving from the tape deck as well. Apart from its size and the way it sounds is the fact that it doesn't heat up as much. Now the current amp I'm using on my desk to drive these specific speakers is a tube amp, and boy, it can heat up. The amount of heat that comes off of this amp is negligible. So there are times when I'm worried about the tube amp because I don't want to reach for something and accidentally get burnt. This thing barely heats up. Even if you touch it, it's not that you'll feel too warm. Maybe I think it takes about 30 minutes for the surface to get very slightly warm. So thanks to that, I don't have any size, weight or heat anxiety whenever I'm at my desk. The last week of using this has been an absolute joy. So this amp paints a very specific picture. In fact, like I mentioned, it took me way back. So the way I see it is, if you're just about getting into hi-fi, if you've just about bought, let's say, a KF-Q150 or entry-level Polk audio speakers or anything in that price range, even if you don't have space on your desk and you want enough power to drive a set of passive speakers that you have, this amp will very easily do it for you. The only place where I see this having limitations is the fact that it's only got one input. So if I want to connect other sources to it, you'll have to unplug the cable, plug in another wire. Yes, you can get a splitter to operate multiple RCA inputs, but then are you somebody who's looking for Bluetooth connectivity? If you're okay with a little bit of compression, this amp doesn't have that. It is restricted in this sense, but if you think you are okay dealing with all this but want that amount of power, this amp works perfectly fine for you. There are still times when I'm listening to this amp where I can't believe that it has the largeness it has in sound despite being as small and compact as it is, because the fact that it's only very slightly larger than a little headphone amp that I picked up way back in 2014 is just amazing to see that it can do what it does, and that to drive a good set of passive speakers. So if you were asking me if you want to buy an amp and you don't have much of a budget, I'd highly recommend this. So when it comes to its price, how much does this cost? In fact, at the time of recording this video, this has a retail price of about $83, but it's being sold for around $77 right now. So I'm sure whichever country you reside in, if you're watching this from outside, you'll be able to check on Amazon, because I think Fosi Audio is also linked up with Amazon. You can also buy it directly from their website, but I think Amazon's a bit easier for everybody. Now, this is a terrific product to own, but if you feel that this doesn't quite fit your palate, and let's say you want some of those things like Bluetooth audio and so on, Fosi Audio does in fact make a whole lot of other audio products. So it's worthwhile going to their website and seeing what all they have, because they have gaming DAC and amps. They also have 2-channel amps, 2.1 channel amps. They're flooded with a lot of really good gear, and it's super affordable. So judging by how good this is, I won't be surprised if the rest of their products are at par with this or moving in a better direction. And just in general, I'm super excited to see what Fosi Audio actually has to offer in the future, because this thing is absolutely remarkable. So I hope you found this video helpful and that I've helped you make some sort of purchase decision. If you would like to support the channel, I'm sure you know exactly how to. But thank you for tuning into Paul's POV for some sound advice.